Hello, everyone. Welcome to this grand academic celebration week to join this event to meet the School of Arts, Design and Architecture's Honorary Doctors, both here in Marcio and those people online. My name is Tuuli Mattelmäki. I'm professor in design in the Department of Design, and I will be hosting this event. It's a really pleasure and very exciting moment for me too. I will shortly first introduce the theme, then introduce the panelists, the honorary doctors, one by one. I've asked them to make a short presentation of their work and their expertise, and that also resonates with the theme of the conferment week. Then they are all introduced to the stage so that we have a panel discussion on themes that appear in these conversations. There will be also time for the audience here in present to ask questions in the end. So the theme that ties together all the events, art program, among other things in this conferment week is species. You see some examples of the artwork here in this very room. We celebrate life in all its limitless forms, from biological to artificial, from organisms to objects, and from currents to organizations, all intertwined in our shared world. In this ceremony week, we decided that all of us involved, we also take our own stand on the species, our own interpretations. So my own take to this theme underlines respectful and genuine interest in understanding fellow individuals and other species and acting accordingly. Life-centered design can include engaging with the help of diverse creative practices to reconsider the ways in which we relate to each other as fellow creatures and open multiple perspectives through individual and collective reflections and interpretations. Often this means bringing imaginative, emotional and experiential qualities to stimulate eco-social change. Many people, one among them is Amartya Nussbaum, has reminded us imagination is a superpower. Nurturing this superpower, along with mindset, skill sets and knowledge fostered in the School of Arts, Design and Architecture, can trigger subtle or major shifts and then transform who we are, what we do and with whom, and who we want to become as fellow creatures in this planet. Through these notes, I hope you are warmed up to get to know the panelists and our honorary doctors. I will first introduce cinematographer Timo Salminen, who unfortunately couldn't join the panel today. He is a highly respected cinematographer, best known for his long-time collaboration with director Aki Kaurismäki. His career took off in the 1980s, and he quickly became a key figure in the field, known for his professionalism, dedication, and distinctive sense of style. Salminen is a master of color and shade, and he's also one of the few cinematographers who continued the tradition of black and white filmmaking. Through decades of work, Salminen's work continues to inspire new generations of cinematographers and students of cinematography, as well as students in all the other majors in film and television in Aalto University. Aalto University School of Arts, Design and Architecture appreciates his dedication and skills in creating respectful, safe and encouraging atmosphere in his teams. The next one is Professor Tuuli Bauer. He's a curator working across contemporary art, film and video and sound. As professor at the School of Arts, Design and Media, Nanyan Technological University, she initiated and co-chaired the Master of Arts in Museum Studies and Curatorial Practice. Currently, she is Senior Principal Research Fellow in NTU Center for Contemporary Art Singapore, the first national research center in the arts, where she led as founding director for over a decade. A career spanning 3 decades, her focus has been on the relationships between place, labor, capital, climate, habitats, and environments. She's also been, since 2018, a member of the advisory board of contemporary art commissioning agency Ihme Helsinki, and the School of Arts, Design and Architecture appreciates her consistency in hosting and facilitating artist engagements. So please come to the stage. And here you have a speaker, and please come here. Here you go.
Thank you. Thanks for coming here, and thank you really to Aalto University for awarding us this immense honor. I mean, it's as an artist, we don't have doctorates. We were pre-doctor education. So at the end of my career, I'm very amazed I will walk away with such an honorary degree. And maybe to say a little bit about the background, you mentioned it already. I'm trained as an artist. I studied stage design, and I work since 30 years as an educator and as a curator in parallel, which has been very instrumental and helpful to me. And when I got a call to Singapore to build up an institution, which was a Kunsthalle, an artisan residency program, an international program, but also to start a master in initially curatorial practice. We extended it by museum studies. It was the first one in the region, and you can imagine this comes with a lot of work, but also with a lot of reward. Yeah, you can see here our institution. We were located in a former military barrack from the British colonial times, and it was the first international arts precinct in Singapore. And you might wonder, because Singapore is such an international trading hub, but the arts actually entered very late. Its museum, Contemporary Art Museum, got inaugurated in 1996, and the National Gallery, which houses also modern art, only inaugurated in 2015. So we were actually even before the inauguration of the museum. And as we all know, artistic education, also art, design, media, plays an enormous role. But if we don't have also institutions that facilitate the presentation to a public, to whom are we basically introducing those practitioners? So it's very important to have a very healthy ecosystem. And we hoped, being in the middle of town, our university is a little bit like Aalto, a bit outside, and our center was right in the middle of Singapore. Has been very important to also bridge between what a university does and what we call a general public. I was also asked to say something about the links to Aalto. And of course, before I was at MIT, before I joined, and at the Royal College, before I joined Nanyan Technological University, and we have this wonderful student dorm, Baker House, which has been designed and built by Alvaro Aalto, and it's an amazing building still in these days. But I also had the pleasure to meet Pia Lindman, who has been a professor here at the university. And during my time at MIT, she was a fellow, both at our Center for Advanced Visual Studies, but also in the Computer Science Artificial Intelligence Lab. And that was way back in 2005. And Pia then, a few years after I was there, said we get a delegation from Aalto University who wanted to bring the arts, design in media and architecture much more closely also in link with the rest of the university. So, and then later Pia actually joined here as a faculty. And my other link is my dear colleague, Lucy Davis. We spent time together at Nanyan Technological University in the School of Art, Design and Media before she joined here as an associate professor for visual cultures and contemporary art. And we also share, speaking of species, the importance of like looking actually into what does it mean, a cohabitation, a dialogue with species. What does migration mean? Humans always migrated, but so do species. And what is our exchange with those, and what is happening when we get relocated by free will or by force. And this is also something that keeps us together until today and is also a strong focus in my work. It was mentioned before, we really look up into places, particularly also the place where we work. What is its history? So also what do our students know about a longer history of a place, and how can they meaningfully engage? So we have here working with interspecies communication, how do artists actually work in a field of science, also the post-human city. We think we might live alone in a city, maybe we think about birds, etc., but the cohabitation is much more multifold and multifocal. So that has been also a big focus on our relationship, literally between artists, the university, and also talking with the public about this. But speaking of species, I had to change my slides a little bit and have to go back to a much earlier project I was involved in, Documenta 11. Documenta is a show that happens every 5 years and brings together the world of the art, and it was started in the aftermath of World War II to reconnect Germany after a fascist period back to the world, and actually also looking back into the wider world and our exchanges. And when we did Documenta 11 in 2001 and 2002, we started with various platforms, and one of them was called Democracy Unrealized, which began in the Vienna Art Academy, then in Berlin House of World Culture. It was continued with experiments with truth, transitional justice, and that took place in The Hague at the International Court of Justice, and also in New Delhi. And I thought, we are behind that, let's engage how we deal with the environment. Climate change is a big focus in my work, but speaking with many of my colleagues, also back in the US, but also otherwise, academic freedom, the freedom of movement in the world, and how do we deal with humans, how do we deal with our own species. The human condition actually is very big on my radar, and I hope we can talk about this a bit later. Thank you.
Thank you. I will take the clicker. Please sit down. Okay, thank you very much. The next one is Professor Anne Light. She's Professor of Design and Creative Technology at the University of Sussex in the UK, and a visiting professor in Interaction Design, Social Change and Sustainability at Malmö University, Sweden. She's a key figure in the participatory design community, known for integrating creative discipline and the humanities with technological research fields such as human-computer interaction and computer-supported collaborative work. The School of Arts, Design and Architecture appreciates Anne's thought leadership, being often few steps ahead of others. She has extensively and ambitiously collaborated and co-authored publications and projects along with us in Aalto University, helping to develop our thoughts with rigor, care, and solidarity. Welcome to the stage. Here you are.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Tuuli, and thank you, Aalto University. Where am I? Yeah. As said, I'm a design researcher. Sometimes I also do designing, and when I do, it's in the context of social process and looking at changing cultures. And I started some time ago, particularly looking at how we bring in the voices that are not usually included in design. So working with older people as representative of many different types of people, but nonetheless in the second part of their lives, and also other groups who might be disadvantaged or excluded from those kinds of discussions. And gradually, as I looked around the world, I realized, particularly in the context of the need for climate care, but perhaps more broadly, that there were not just humans in need of recognition, but the inequalities that we saw and the extractivist nature of much industry, especially in the 20th century and increasingly in the 21st, has required us to think much more broadly. So I grew up in much more of a traditional, how do we manage social, and now I'm interested much more in the eco-social. So I put together a slide here which was shall we say, an agenda for the kind of work that I've been doing, advocating for planet-centric design, and really to echo what I was saying, looking at how we work with the human in the more than human. So while there's lots of need for representation, also there's a need for sensitization and how we understand more about what it means to coexist and cohabit. So a lot of my work has been working with people who perhaps are actually just fearing the future, to look for a kind of active, hopeful path, and working very closely in place at the moment. And I'll briefly mention a couple of projects in a minute. So we're looking at a different ethics, an ethics of care, perhaps to manage and contrast with an ethics of control, which is a lot of what I've seen with my history in technology. And hoping by the time that we have done some of this work that there might be enough interest at ground level, as one might call it, at grassroots level in place, to find ways of being ready and resilient for some of the changes to come, as well as to mitigate some of the things that might otherwise develop. So my strongest connection with Aalto University is having had the privilege of working for 3 years with a number of researchers here on the Creatures Project. Well, that already has a species theme to it. It stood for Creative Practice for Transformative Futures, but we elided it, and I give credit here to many people's colleague here, Andrea Botero, for this very neat elision into creatures, which became something that we capitalized on, and we built a creatures framework. And in one little corner here, you can see some work that I was lucky enough to follow with Furtherfield for some time, which was actually looking at what happens when you give people the chance to embody different species, and this was a range of species, to think about the future of an urban park together. And so we moved around the park as one of 7 species that represented many of the different actors in the park. I was grass. I can tell you more about what it's like to embody grass, if anyone is curious about that, after the event today. But we had such busy actors as dogs and quiet actors as stag beetles and trees. So that was one example. But more recently, working with the same group, Ruth Catlow, who's been very involved in this thinking, and I tried to take what could be a multi-species live-action role play into the context of what does it mean to talk about 50 years into the future, and how do we convert some of the polluters we have within our places currently into multi-species and more than human type environments. So we're actually running that at the moment. Another project which, yesterday we just found out that we've been recognised by the EU Ocean Pact as part of a kind of movement forward in looking at how we might connect citizens better to their ocean and waterways. So that's been a really exciting news for us. But principally, this is 7 different cities who are coastal or facing lagoons and so on. We've got Venice, for instance. I'm working on this through Malmö, which has a sound and new wharfs and things like that. And we're looking at how we get the populations of these cities interested in their waterways as something more than a surface or a threat. And last, I'm also involved in bringing the next generation through as a design researcher, working with participatory design and lots of young doctoral students who are just starting out on this process of getting their doctoral chops, so to speak, and that's called Reworlding. And that's another attempt to think about species, about living together, about what it means to create a different world for the future and for these young people who are going to be making it. And we called it Reworlding because it starts with the thought that actually we need really significant change. So on that note, thank you very much, and I'll leave it here.
Thank you, Anne. Yes, let's continue with these exciting talks. Next one, Professor Joe Sanders is accomplished architect, designer, writer, and educator specializing in inclusive design. Sanders is the founder of GSA MIXdesign, an inclusive design studio that makes everyday building types accessible and welcoming to people. In addition, Sanders is professor at Yale University, where his classes consider the intersection of architecture, inclusivity, and mental and physical health. He has also contributed to Aalto University through a joint design studio and guest lectures on social equity. School of Arts, Design and Architecture appreciates his profound impact on inclusive architecture, exploring the interplay between culture, social space, gender identity, technology, and nature. Please, Joel, the stage is yours. Here you go.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and like the others, it's a great honor to be up here and to get this honorary doctorate. When I got the call from the dean, I was just flabbergasted, so thank you. But I really credit to Purio Sanaho, whose name I always mispronounce. After we know each other, I think we've been collaborating, you'd said a decade, I think it's been more than 15, 20 years, ongoing collaborations together that have been very, very rewarding and enabled me to come to your exquisite campus, probably the most beautiful university designed by one of the greatest architects in the world, so you're very lucky. But I only have 5 minutes, so to begin. Leonardo's iconic image of the Vitruvian Man exemplifies the discipline of architecture's investment in a problematic notion of humans as belonging to a species, Homo sapiens, defined as a class of individuals with common attributes based on their shared biological characteristics. And this archetype flattens human difference. From antiquity to today, architects and designers have designed and created buildings and spaces based on a universal human subject who is assumed to be white, able-bodied, cisgendered, and male. So bodies that fall outside of these standards are considered deviations from the norm or the normal. And so consequently, this is a big statement, but many of us argue, we can talk about that, the design disciplines have historically perpetuated ableism, racism, and heteronormativity, and we've been sort of complicit in implementing Western colonialism and imperialism. So rather than use design to enforce species unity, the work of my inclusive design studio that you mentioned, JSA MIXdesign, explores the architecture of difference, considered not as an exception, but as the norm. We collaborate primarily with institutional clients to develop design recommendations, prototypes, and increasingly guidelines that meet the needs of a diverse spectrum of human beings. And so we consider, as illustrated on this diagram, intersecting factors that make us more than human. That include gender. We think about men, women, trans, and non-binary people. We think about mobility, deaf, hard of hearing, blind, and low vision. We think about culture, race, language, and religion, and of course about body types. We think about the needs of children, adult, and elderly, who all come in different sizes and weights. And so our motto or objective is to create spaces that allow the maximum number of differently embodied people to have more or less the same shared experience when interacting with one another and using public spaces, while also recognizing that there's certain populations, for example, Muslim women, who have unique privacy needs that also need to be accommodated. So we have, let's see, change? Yeah, okay, you got it. No? You had that slide on before, right? Yeah, good, okay. So we have expertise in 3 building types: restrooms, museums, and universities, and I'm going to show you one example of each. So restrooms. We consider ourselves binary abolitionists. At Gallaudet University, a school for the deaf in Washington, D.C., we developed what we call our stalled restroom prototype that was developed in 2016 in response to the culture wars that were triggered by the threat, supposedly, of transgender people accessing public restrooms, which is a controversy that has not been settled in our country. And this prototype is equipped with communal washing and grooming stations, and full-height toilet stalls, as well as caregiving, lactation, prayer, and sensory retreats. And our prototype supports a range of users, and I'm going to focus on gender in this case. They include pregnant women, non-binary people, Muslim Orthodox Jews, as well as men with shy bladder syndrome, which is at least 1 in 10 Americans men face that issue. We also address what we call potty parity, the unfair and equal wait times that women have traditionally faced in traditional men's and women's rooms. We also were thinking about locker rooms. For example, at Carnegie Mellon and Portland Community College, we have 2 projects under construction where we're implementing, and I'm very proud of this for America, we're implementing a non-binary locker room. I can't go into great detail, but it has communal lockers for changing, putting away heavy belongings, and then we provide cabanas for changing and showering for privacy. So the point is, it's not just about adding a grab bar, it's about dismantling a spatial system that polices who counts as normal and who is not. Why is... I'm sorry, I don't know why this is not working. No, it should be. Okay, sorry about that. So we also think about museums. Inclusive museum design depends on engagement, the active participation of users who provide valuable insights from their lived experience of the designed environment. And we have collaborated with students and faculty from Yale Public Health, and I'm very proud that I've been recently made a professor of public health as well as architecture. And working with them, we've developed engagement tools, surveys, interviews, and workshops to understand, in this case, the intersecting needs of museum visitors. So, for example, we're working on this project that's going to go under construction soon at the Queens Museum in New York, and we convened workshops to design an older adult hub, and based on the input of this research, we generated designs that include an art studio, a commons for digital literacy classes to overcome the digital divide that sometimes excludes older folks like me, and also a multi-purpose lounge that can be reconfigured for discussions and group presentations. Okay, and working for university clients, we've developed what my partners and I call multisensory wayfinding. And these are principles that use color, materials, lighting, and acoustics to augment traditional wayfinding graphics, to differentiate between 2 kinds of spaces: barrier-free circulation zones, wide enough for at least 2 wheelchair users to pass one another or to also talk together, and differentiated from activity zones, activity microclimates. And our ambition is to help everyone, including people with disabilities, to navigate confidently through college campuses and grounds. And we're applying these principles in 2 ways. First, by, which I never thought we would do, we're actually drafting design guidelines for universities like the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where some of you have worked, and Washington University, Yale University. And right now we have this project in construction at Princeton University, and it's a ground-up residential college named after its principal donor, Melody Hobson, a Black woman alum, demonstrating the university's need to sort of overcome its tradition as being an elite white institution. So finally, in addition to working with clients on design projects, MIXdesign also raises awareness, how we conduct interviews, publications, lectures. Our goal is to encourage designers to see human difference, not as a deviation from the norm, but as a generator of new spatial logics. We believe that designing through the lens of species diversity invites lived knowledge experience that sparks design innovation. Our goal is, we believe that looking at the lens of these, through the lens of these traditionally marginalized people, will lead to the creation of multisensory immersive environments that will enhance the experience of all members of the human species, embracing its diversity and variability. So, thank you very much. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic. Next, we have art collector Rafaela Seppälä. She's also chairman of Tiftö Foundation Board. She holds a Master of Science in Journalism from Columbia University and has extensive experience in the media field. She has made a significant societal impact in both the art and business sectors and is a prominent art and design connoisseur and collector. She holds several influential positions contributing to the advancement of art and design in Finland. School of Arts, Design and Architecture appreciates Rafaela Seppälä's strong and supportive relationship with Aalto University and the ways in which she actively contributes to the discussions and initiatives fostering collaboration between the university and the business sector and emphasizes the importance of integrating art and research with society. Welcome to the stage. Here we are.
Hello, everybody. I'm extremely honored to be here, especially with such wonderful academic experts in all these fields that Aalto Arts embraces. And I feel sort of, in a way, a bit of an imposter, not having been in a university for the past 50 years. But I must say that in this honor, that's why maybe I will speak to you about this theme that we were given of species in a bit of a different way. Because I've been thinking about what is important and what is, what will make things better. Let me. Voila. So, the human species distinguishes itself from others as having developed abstract thought and the ability to assess and connect and compose with all the species around us. Humans are also the only species known to express themselves through specifically made art. From cave paintings to contemporary music, from film to fashion, theater to performance arts, and from architecture to design, the human species has developed art forms that allow individuals to imagine, push their boundaries, thus generating discussions and opening points of view. This is the mother of invention and our road to hopefully better future for all of mankind, many of which was illustrated by Joel's examples here. The role of the arts is to remind us all to keep our minds open and receptive to what other species in nature are and can do. We can borrow from these differences and become more than we were to begin with. The works of Toni Toivonen here remind us of the value of life and how it can leave traces for future generations. Artists create their own creatures that are like a new species unto themselves. They communicate with us and touch our sensitivities and perhaps open something locked up inside us and that we may not even recognize ourselves. That's how new ideas are born. Jacob Hashimoto, an American artist, desperate after years of study in the highest institutions of the land, he wanted to find an original form of expression, something that nobody had done before. He said, everything's been done. But then he went to his father, who said, think about what you really liked as a child. And he loved playing with kites. And his Japanese roots, his father was originally Japanese, he started creating works with kites that are today an inspiration for designers and architects everywhere. Much like Kim Simonsson, you will hear very soon here, Tony Osler, and another American artist, has created creatures of his own as well, maybe a species, to express something deep inside each of us. Deeply ingrained in ourselves at the depths of our soul is a sense of community and belonging, and art is a way of affirming that cultural diversity. American-Iranian artist, for instance, Sarah Rabar, laments the conflict between her two nations through art by employing traditional fabrics from one country, Iran, with the forms of the American flag. All this to awaken America's consciousness to the plight of her country. Can art and technology unite the world? Well, that is the question Nam June Paik put to himself. He's one of the most innovative artists ever. As early as 1963, he imagined the internet as a superhighway for communications with cables, satellites, and fiber optics, allowing video conferences from different locations around the globe. Already in 1980, Paik foresaw the climate crisis and wrote an essay, How to Make Oil Obsolete. He put televisions among grass, among other things, where he made works demanding that brain power take over oil power. In 1973, Paik predicted the arrival of global satellite television through technology, hoping it would unite former enemies and promote international understanding. Around that time, Paik also foresaw, I quote, a mixed media telephone system for 1,001 applications that would allow you to watch television, make video calls, go shopping, and even get a health check. Sound familiar? That was the smartphone. He predicted that everyone would be an active visual artist using camcorders to live stream and thus announced the birth of social media decades before it became reality in the 2000s. All these predictions came from being curious and examining and interpreting the life around us and how technology could change our world. That's what you do here at Aalto. The role of the artist, however, is whatever his chosen field, is to open these new horizons, and to do so, students and researchers have to open their minds and listen to what is happening around them. Mariko Mori, in the Venice Biennale not so long ago, invited everyone in something resembling this to go into the stomach of the whale, to acquaint themselves with another environment than their own. And Paik and Mori and all these and many other artists have been visionaries, creating a landscape, a goal, and a purpose toward which humanity can direct its energies to forge what would be a better world for all. Here at Aalto, it is important to open young minds to receive the signals of what exists around our own little life, be bold and be brave, find new ideas, new solutions for them and their children. Thank you. Thank
you. Then sculptor Kim Simonsson is the most successful contemporary artist internationally to have graduated from the Department of Ceramics and Glass Design at the University of Art and Design Helsinki. As an internationally successful designer-artist rooted in the craftsmanship, Simonsson serves as an inspiring figure for students, particularly in the master major in contemporary design at Aalto University. Simonsson's studio in Fiskars serves as an inspiration for our students, offering them valuable insights into working as a freelance designer-artist and the career choices involved. The School of Arts, Design and Architecture appreciates Kim Simonsson's kindness and authenticity, through which he demonstrates that success can be achieved by staying true to oneself. Welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Tuuli, for the very nice introduction. This image is from my studio in Fiskars, and it quite well explains what I do. I take a lump of clay, and then I try to form it into a shape that carries emotional charge. Being an artist is often described as the freest profession. You're supposed to do whatever comes to your mind. Clay as a material, in my mind, mirrors that. You can do it, it's kind of like the ultimate material. You can do anything from it. Though there is a caveat. You have to learn the skill first. And once you learn it, then the sky is the limit, or the mind, if you want to say that way. Over time, I have come to admit to myself one fundamental thing, that I'm a craftsman. When I was studying, it was kind of felt like, it was looked down on this craftsman thing. But I have realized that that's what I am to the core, actually. And I love doing things. And I often said to people that I might have a craft gene, or I belong to a species of craftsmen. This image is from the old former Arabia factory. This is where I studied, where the School of Aalto, Art and Design used to be located. It was a bit different from this, that it's now, where it's now located. The place had a lot of history, and the spaces were quite rough. So now I'm going to talk about my interpretation on the theme species. So when I was 13, I realized that I'm quite good in drawing, and I actually loved it. But I realized also that there wasn't many other friends that I had that had the same passion. And I kind of felt like a different species to them. I suppose this is a very common thing for any young starting artist. So when I got accepted to Aalto University, and that was actually by mistake, I wanted to apply to the Art Academy, but was late for the test, and then as a joke I applied to Aalto. And I was looking at what is the easiest department to get into. It was ceramics and glass or textile. So then I decided to apply to ceramics and glass. And for my surprise, I got accepted. And there I realized that I had come home. All the other people were thinking the same way as I did. I had found my species, and it was such a huge relief to myself. And then actually I started to realize that inside there in the school there was also the subspecies. The ones who studied graphic design were a bit different, the ones photo, a bit different film and so on, and spatial design. But we all met together in the Kipsari Cafe and became friends together. And also in ceramics department we had the subspecies with the ones who wanted to do product design, and the ones who wanted to do pottery, and the ones who wanted to do more like a contemporary art. So when I graduated, I realized that I had actually combined in myself all these different species from taik. I a little bit felt a bit like an outsider in the art world because I didn't graduate from the Fine Art Academy, and that was supposed to be the top place. But eventually I realized that I might have a strength there, that I had graduated from taik, because I had connected all these different knowledges from this product design a little bit to myself, and also especially I had many friends who studied photography, and photography was very popular at that time and still is, but then we had just started the Helsinki school. And so I decided to use this as inspiration for my pictures, and this is one example here, that it wasn't just a picture of a sculpture, but it also had a kind of narrative element into it, and the picture became also interesting. I'm very humbled to get this honorary doctorate from Aalto University. I'm also especially happy that it's been given to a craft maker, because that's how I see myself. And there's so many excellent artists working with clay in Finland and internationally, and it's so wonderful to see that the popularity of that material has exploded in the last 20 years. I used to think that craft makers, especially those working with clay, might become an endangered species. But it no longer feels that way. I'm very happy with that. And also with the rapid advancement of technology, I believe more and more people are drawn to things they can understand and make with their own hands, things with a clear physical limit and a tangible process. Over time, I developed enough skill to start creating also my own species, the moss people, and those things I have been doing now for the last 8 years. I can't get rid of them. And there's also eventually, I also combined this knowledge of the technology with the craft, and made some giant versions of those figures. Thank you so much.
Thank you once again. It was a fantastic opportunity to hear your thoughts and see your fantastic slides too. And I think they combine very nicely both, the kind of profiles that you represent, but also the theme of species. I thought we start with kind of warming up question from like sports. How does it feel now? So Ute, if you don't mind expressing maybe with one sentence, having listened to all these honorary doctors and their presentation, how does it feel now?
I think there's always more that unites us than divides us. And it's wonderful to see this across disciplines. And I think you shouldn't be scared that like craft doesn't play a role in art. I think craft plays a very important role in the arts. It always did. And I'm really glad that materiality is coming back to our world, particularly to a virtual world, because we live in this world. And I think we need to be reminded and to be with materials and to experience our world reminds us to our humanity. And I think that's also something we all share.
Thank you. Anne, do you want to continue?
I was really struck by the differences in practice and how actually we were just turning an object round and round in a sense with species. For me, that is really what design can do, is sit in the middle and then look at it from so many different facets and then actually work with people, perhaps this idea of difference, bringing some people together around a theme in this way. And I thought this was just exemplary of that, and I found it very moving. Thank you.
Thank you. Kim, let's go in a row like that.
Yes. Yes, this thing with the species, and I mean, it was so wonderful to listen to what you do, what you think, what you write. It's amazingly important. As me, as a person who sits in my studio alone, it's also wonderful to see that there's people who think about outside their own studio, but in the whole picture. So, but it's like a very big things that you are discussing. For me, sometimes it's very hard to understand because it becomes so massive and so important. So,
Thank you. Rafaela.
Yeah, I think it's the study of the use of the object, which is important for me. Design is, the function that will make life work in a better way, is finding the solutions for the problems, and the way you're addressing also the multitude of issues that people find in their daily lives. I think that that's extremely important, and the fact that there's a discussion at such a level from different perspectives is very important, and that's really what I appreciate also about the way Aalto works, and the way also it links in then to business and maybe getting those ideas out into the world. And I think that's going to be a fundamental role. It's not just keeping it in the labs; it's getting it out there, and I think these discussions are helpful that way. And thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Joel.
Well, am I getting your name? Is it Kim?
Yes.
Kim. Well, I love that the way you use the word species in so many different ways in English. And it really made me think that vision of being surrounded by alien species, of people who are studying different disciplines. And I love that. But I also thought that in the end, that although we come from different disciplines, artists and architects, people who work in film and video, that maybe what we have in common is maybe a tradition at our best of really challenging the status quo, raising awareness and making people think differently about not only, let's say, the human species condition, but also as a consequent, the more than human that you were talking about, and the consequences of our life on the planet and what it means for animals and living things. And I guess as an American, and I'm going to speak to that, I think that we are, at least in my country, potentially an endangered species, and I hope that maybe with the support of you here in wonderful countries like Finland and others, that we can resist and fight back and continue that sort of great tradition that I think is also represented by the very architecture of Aalto that this university is named after.
Thank you. I discussed with you earlier that you're welcome to add questions or topics that you want to talk about, which is great. I have a couple of questions here prepared. One of them is the theme species, and you already addressed those in your presentations, and now you also started reflecting it even more widely. It's a topical question. It's a really urgent and important question that we talk about more than human and planetary questions. Is there one of you who wants to start reflecting on how does the species resonates with you?
I would just say, working the last 10 years a lot on climate change, and also I work a lot in the Pacific, and sea level rise now threatened by deep sea mining, coastal communities, the impact that we create on other species, not reflecting what's going on, I think has been very important. But I have been being so immersed in that, and I think a number of us are, I didn't realize how quickly we can actually start harming our own species. I mean, I think none of us, and we're a little bit older in age, I never imagined we would go into such a violent contemporary. As I said, we are very engaged with protecting species, the environment. It's at the core of our work. And I was kind of shocked to realize how the human condition or our peer species fell a bit off in these debates. And this is why I thought, like, it's, for me now is a moment, working a lot with the post-human condition, etc., to look back into the human condition and how we actually act with each other. So oddly, I feel thrown back to the human species in this very moment and how we act in this world.
Thank you.
Well, maybe I would add that I think one of the maybe lessons of this carefully put together maybe panel is that you can't really think the human species without thinking about the non-human. And let's say, although my work has tend to sort of focus on our neglect of marginalized members of the human species, you can't, they're interchangeable. And part of what I and others believe is that moving forward, positing alternative futures, means looking back, accountability. And so a lot of what I've become interested in is, again, as I mentioned, looking at the kind of role that we have played as humans in marginalizing other humans. But of course, in the name of, let's say, white male Western heteronormative centrism, we have not only dominated others who are different from the norm, but we have used it as a justification for basically exploiting nature and also animals, so that they're absolutely, it's really one topic. I think we just look at it maybe with different levels of emphasis.
Do you want to continue?
No, I think that, no, absolutely, but I'm also thinking that we have to look at opportunities where they exist. Is that the fact is that, for instance, in your work, you're recognizing issues and solving them. But that we also recognize the different species that exist around the world. We're becoming more aware, and there should be more connectivity and learning from each other, learning from each species what they have something to bring to the table. And this should also generate some sort of course, with animals, I mean, the language doesn't exist there in the same way, but the fact that you can start communicating with people who are, I mean, what do you call a species? I started when the theme came, I said dictionary. Here I look it up, and it can apply to everything, to animals, to humans, to plants, to everything. And the fact that we find opportunities, for instance, in plants, I mean, the moss people have visited the forest a lot. They've learned from the moss also how to live among the elements. And I think that's why we have to keep positive and see the opportunities for connections and developing new things.
I could build on that in the sense that one of the things that I think a lot of people have not grown up understanding is the interdependencies that we live amongst. And the very fact, if we look historically, that there was no oxygen before there were plants, and that there would still be no oxygen if there weren't plants, and yet plant blindness is pervasive. I mean, people often who get into multi-species activities focus on animals, but then ignore the fact that there are all these other types of species. So I think it's really interesting to think ecologically rather than necessarily to focus on species per se, because then you actually start to look at the systems and the way that things play together. And it comes back to your recognition of the importance of connection. And some people, it's about how they work with their immediate community, and some people can engage more globally. But I think we've had a time when people, when we've been almost breaking down some of those connections for people, and now it's really important we have a time when the focus is on learning how things interrelate before we learn even necessarily what the detail is. And so I think that's really important. Within design education, I think we've always looked at things as systems, but that's quite esoteric compared with ordinary education. So there's a little plug for design education, perhaps, that we should be taking it out into the mainstream a bit further.
Thanks. Kim, go ahead.
Yes, well, I was thinking about this species. Well, I live in Fiskars, that we just built a house, and now this one small bird has found a spot under our stairs, made a nest there. And it's still very afraid of me when I go and see. I look on top of, from between the cracks, following what's happening there. Of course, you're very worried that it won't, I won't chase it away. There's 5 small eggs there. But it still comes there. So I guess, there is a way, I suppose, to also get things working together, But of course, it's a massive, we are human beings, are very bad, obviously. But maybe there is a way to also with the plants. Well, it's pretty brutal. We have these small snails, these brown snails that are not supposed to be in our village, and there comes this squad of murderers when it rains, human beings, to cut their heads off, and it's very brutal. I don't know, but then again, you think that those are not supposed to be in that village, those species. I don't know what I'm saying, but
yeah, it resonates.
So I don't know,
with
is
me
it
a
like
lot.
you have to control things or just let things go, be? Or
Yeah. So who are we to dictate which weeds and snails go away and which stay? Thank you. Oftentimes it's discussed that we need a lot of changes and transformations, and in the Aalto-University we have the cross-cutting team of radical creativity. Maybe some of you have heard about it. I would be interested in hearing your thoughts. Why, where, and if creativity is important and needed?
I think it's the beginning of everything. You have to, without creativity, there will be no progress, no coming forward, no movement, and the ideas come from the strangest places, as we know, and I think that businesses need new ideas in order to thrive, and you need technology to make new ideas a reality, and that's why this interaction and the radical creativity is a wonderful sort of way to focus the necessity to be inventive, to try new things, to go out on a limb and really get things going. And I think that's essential, especially in a small country like Finland. But Finland, and with all the foreign students here too, it's sort of a hub of creativity, and I think it's developing every year more, and now I think there's a program of radical creativity coming along, and I'm very excited about that.
Thank you. We're hearing her speaking what we already mentioned. She is a very strong speaker for this collaboration between society and Aalto-University's themes. Thank you. Who wants to continue?
Well, creativity, it's like, I don't know, for me it's a very natural thing to, people ask me where do I get my ideas. Of course they are connections of the same kind of thing, but I have never had problems with that. It's a natural, but I guess for everybody it's pretty natural. Whatever you do, you have to have creativity, and yeah, maybe we can solve things, but yeah. What kind of creativity we are talking about? Is it like culture or technology?
To mix things up, you need to put different things, in different positions, turn them upside down, inside out, go to new places. I mean, like Mariko Mori, and put yourself in the stomach of the whale and see what happens. And it might bring out something. A new way to light up the stomach of whale, for instance.
And you seem to have...
I was just, if I can do the equivalent of what you did with the bird and the snail and give an example of some recent practice that I've been involved with, I was just thinking about the way that when we were working with communities, and we've got at the moment this live action role play, which we don't tell them is about role play, because when we asked people whether they would come if it was role play, they said no. But we just tell them that they're going to imagine their world in the future, their place, their town. If they care about their town, how might they imagine it in the future? And they come along, and we set them an exercise of thinking about how things could be. They're given a character, but one of the things they're asked to do is to describe the character's burning passion, and that the character that they're going to be will be the person that they are, but who will advocate for that burning passion. So built into the structure is a way of giving them the oomph, we might say, to say the things that they might not say if they were sitting in a room without such a structure. And then they discuss what they could use some money for and what they might want for their place. And then they go into the future again, and they've had a difficult time. We called it the Decade of Lost Summers. They project onto that what that is, and then they come together to tell each other how they got through it. Young people interviewing older people. And so there's a lot of structures here to help them do it. But what we found people were saying at the end was, I just parked my cynicism for this exercise. I just found myself having a really nice time thinking about how things could be different and better and the things we wanted. And instead of going, oh, well, there's no point in doing that because it can't be done, we actually all talked together. And these are maybe some of them friends, some of them strangers from very much the same places. Some of you heard me talk a few months ago about launching this, and it's really taken off. But it's been so exciting watching this lack of cynicism flourish and how happy people feel. So I suppose if I'm talking about radical creativity, this immersive participative stuff has been really exciting to play with, so to speak.
Oh, lovely, thank you. Sure.
Yeah. Well, I love your phrase radical creativity as opposed to creativity, because I'm just coming from Italy, and ever since Vasari wrote The Lives of the Artists and celebrated, the creativity of Western male artists like Michelangelo, who I love. But what I think is really exceptional is radical creativity, and for me that means a kind of tradition of a long tradition of artists who have really sort of challenged convention, out of the box thinking, challenged the status quo, and I think creativity, at least for me, and I think for others, it often comes from empathizing or looking at the world through the perspective of people and things that are different from ourselves. And you were talking about maybe getting inspiration from the birds hatching eggs under your stair. For me and my colleagues, it's, again, looking at the world through the lens and the challenges that people who are different face. But at the risk of repeating myself, for us the conviction is that looking at the lens through different perspectives leads to creative design innovations. It's a catalyst for creativity that will actually, I think, enhance everybody's experience of the world. And I think that's what radical creative, not just artists, but people at these universities do from different disciplines. Yeah.
I really loved, Anne, your idea about being a straw, the grass straw.
Yeah,
how
big
that
grass.
feels. Maybe that's something we should do these exercises. So Finnish people often have this exercise where they are acting like they are a wall. Nobody sees them.
I have to say that grass was very self-important. It's amazing colonial being, grass, I discovered. It's amazing what occupying some other mindset for a little while can do. But it wasn't terribly happy because it's so self-important. Anyway.
Lovely. Do you want to address this?
Yeah, I want to come back also with creativity or what you said about art. How do we know only humans appreciate art? We don't, because we don't know really what species think and do. And I'm always amazed how creative nature, or even, can we call it nature? Is it not also culture? What is happening there? And I mean, Thomas Aracino, for example, studies spiders, and we had a spider lab for 7 months at our institution. And there are jumping spiders, and they actually create very complex dances for mating, and they're really individualized. And so, you know, while we always we're a little bit always the elephant in the room, very big and trampling on everything, we might overlook also a lot of creativity from which we can learn that is happening elsewhere. As you say, you're the grass. What do you learn? Imagining what's happening, or I mean, we have theoreticians and anthropologists like Anat Singh talking about a fungal world, how fungi can communicate 80 kilometers amongst asphalt through the city. So I think we don't know so much about this multi-species environment. And I think it's really important that we listen more to this. And there might be a lot of creativity, actually, from which we can learn maybe as humans to interact maybe a bit more sensitive.
Thank you. Do you have any questions that you would like to address each other? Something that, or no, I can continue and give you a little time. We have a scientific and artistic advisory board visiting us every now and then, and they visited last winter. And one of the pieces of advice they gave us that we should definitely look more into our artistic research and to have this kind of stronger stand in what is artistic research. And I don't know if some of you want to also advise us on how that should be done.
That's a big fight. No, it is. I mean, I worked in art academies where, of course, the focus is on the arts, but I also worked a long time at universities. And if it comes to evaluation, we are very much drawn to STEM. And I think it's really crucial to appreciate artistic research, knowledge production in a different way as something with equal rights, but also with equal support in terms of grants, in terms of evaluation, and not just as an add-on to other things. And we really, I don't know how it's here, but we always have struggled also in promotion cases, the whole academic system, which I don't find quite radical and creative, with like everything has to be peer-reviewed, it's exactly listed, the ranking of the journals, the Hirsch Index, and so I'm very concerned with my young students who want to do an academic career, if I should recommend that to them. If this is not like a little bit of a prison we put them in, where creativity gets a little bit starved out. And so I think really to put more focus also onto artistic research, the unconventional methods, the different approaches, we can actually learn a lot, also in other disciplines.
Wow, thank you. Did you?
Well, while I appreciate the recommendation, I think that even the term artistic research risks reinforcing a very traditional notion that, again, that we as artists are somehow a unique species being with different, characteristics and a different way of thinking. And I think what's more important, and I think it's building on what you're saying, is this notion of interdisciplinarity that, in fact, is practiced here. And particularly is this maybe affiliation between, let's say, artistic practices, humanistic disciplines, but the STEM, which have often been said of the sciences. I grew up thinking they were somehow unartistic, oppositional to what we did. But learning more and more how interconnected that we've been talking about this. And again, just speaking about my own practice, what really sort of changed the way we think was when my dean said, you really got to go across the street and talk to people at public health. That never happens. We live in this brutalist building, not this wonderful open indoor outdoor building, but anyway, I won't get into that. But so isolated. And it was actually learning from people in public health. Why? Because they are trained to listen. Architects, at least where I come from, were meant to be geniuses that, God forbid, the model was Frank Lloyd Wright, you have an opinion about a chair, And so it really, and I mean that, it changed everything, was this notion of engagement, because that's what people in public health do. But we had to, and what I'm proud of is that we're creating a new hybridized way of, let's say, engagement that really brings the best of both disciplines as a way of teasing at other kinds of issues. And the same, I think, would be true with work that we're doing at Princeton in this project. We're working with Bureau Happold, and they're one of the great international structural engineers who specialize in sustainable practices. And of course, you can't think about human health and well-being without thinking about climate change and creating, like this building has, windows with shades that sort of regulate and modulate climate so that, let's say, neurodiverse people, some of whom are prone to overstimulation because of glare or overheating, or not just neurodiverse, all of us. So again, I'm just two examples, I think, that sort of reinforce how the disciplines need to come together. Particularly, I think, the sciences and the arts.
That's a very important point of view. I hope my colleagues are making notes.
Yeah.
Yes, Anne, please go ahead.
Well, I was thinking about whether I identified as a sort of arts-based research, design-based research, thinking that possibly I identify first as an activist, which is slightly different. And so it's a pragmatics of trying things out to find how they land in the world, so that we know what we're changing, and making myriad experiments, which I think is what the arts are so good at. And now finding that a number of scientist colleagues who are frustrated by their failure to communicate, and you talked about engagement, and the kind of worship for science and technology as the future, when it doesn't really always engage with culture or meaning, which is how, first of all, we make our worlds, and then how we communicate between different parts of our worlds. And with that missing, they are actually looking for something else. And it's very frustrating that we're living at a period when arts and some forms of design are being defunded. The humanities is being looked over and ignored, philosophy, as you say, just being marginalised or written out of the story, and technology is being held up as this thing. I mean, technology is wonderful, but it is only as good as the culture that makes it, and if it's only being used for profit, then it will wipe everything out eventually, because that's the nature of scarcity and resource. So what are we doing? And why aren't we listening to arts and humanities scholars and practitioners? And that's one of the reasons I think that as an activist, I'm actually doing some of the work I do, because it can't only be something that makes change on the ground. It has to be something that we then show to policy, show to scientists, so they can understand there is so much more.
Thank you. Rafaela, don't you?
I was just thinking that there is one element that in these discussions we haven't touched upon, is also the feeling, the sentiment that good design or delving into new things brings out in people, which should be something which is fundamental in also giving people a way of having a better life, having another perspective of feeling better with the people around them, communicating, which should then lead to better design. I mean, it's all a sort of circle that exists, and I think that that's just one element that I think we should keep in mind, that we're human. Well, the human species, if we're talking about all these different species, the human species has very strong feelings. I mean, so do some animal species. I'm not going to go into that, but and they should not be ignored in this context. On the contrary.
Yeah, I think people who are happy, they are also nicer to other people and species, I suppose. So.
Lovely conversation. Shall we go to the audience questions at this point? If you have a question, please wait for the mic to arrive so that also people online. There seems to be Annukka Svanda, one of our activists.
Hello. Thank you, Tuuli. I'm a design researcher, so bear with me. This question is a bit designerly. You've been talking at some point of a very two-sided division between human and non-human. But I would like to look a bit deeper in that human side, and I would claim that there are different species within one human. So depending on the situation or the position or the whatever moment there is, we had a very nice explanation from an architectural point of view, and then also a very dilemma situation from who gets to live and who not, from Kim, in regards of the snails and the birds. So what is your advice on how do we live with our internal species that might sometimes be conflicting?
We might die. No, we might die literally. I mean, we're fighting a lot of bacteria often in our bodies, and we are already, we are a habitat for multiple species, as you say. So that's very true, and I think it's the same what we do externally. I mean, in Singapore we have something that is called pest control. So we try to get rid of everything that we consider a pest, and that's actually quite a lot of species. And if we don't have this healthy ecosystem, also in us, we actually die. So we just have to come to terms with that everything is also a habitat.
And to extend that a little bit to the existential, I suppose to some extent what we eat feeds our biome in different ways. So we are in a way playing God with our systems as well as the rest of the world. Not always very knowingly, and certainly it's under-researched, the degree of the billions and billions of life that supports us and that we support. But I think what's so interesting now is the way that medicine is beginning in the West to acknowledge how important the gut is. So I think it's a very, thank you for bringing it in. It's very important that we remember that part of our environment as well as the outsides. But I think this notion of how we keep interrupting equilibria and moving through them, and that idea also of flow and the fact that we have tried to make things static while we understand it at the same time as having to recognise that it's endlessly in flux, I think is particularly well caught in thinking about our own systems and the relation between inside and outside.
Do you want to? No. Okay. There's another question, please. Elizabeth.
Yes, hi, I'm Elizabeth Bornet. I'm from the film department, and I've been delving into creativity and innovation. I was fascinated that some of you, or most of you, are working towards humankind, and then Kim is working more with an individual artistic, in an individual artistic way. So I was just wondering what your reflections are on how to learn and interact with the individual and the collective. If that makes sense.
Was it for me, the question?
No, but I'm going to look at you.
Yes, well, I think when I was studying, I realized that I should just concentrate on certain things. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to do these sculptures. I'm going to do this, and then that's my strength. And then, I don't know, maybe I'm thinking that I somehow, through concentrating on a certain thing, maybe I can develop something that is maybe get some bigger audience, some feeling or some. I don't know. I can't say that I'm trying to change it, make any big changes it to people, or I'm not going to change. I don't know. That I try to develop a certain speciality skill that then eventually will give people some kind of emotional maybe feeling or give them something. And I don't know what that is. But that's how I decided to do. I decided I'm not going to start to do all kind of big things, that I'm going to just concentrate on this. And I have realized that there is a lot of people who actually like my work, and maybe even some people, they have even maybe given some solace even on my work. But yes, so I don't see myself as any kind of a bigger or something. I don't know how to explain this.
Yeah. I would say to that, the individual work and the collective, I think the important thing is having connections between everybody, having a dialogue, talking to people, opening minds, trying to see other points of view. I think that's the best thing people can do in order to get things going. Not sit in one's corner, you need to communicate with the people around us. I mean, the population of the Earth is just huge, and there are all these species. I mean, there's a million connections just dying to be made, and that's the way things go forward. So.
Well, maybe I would just add one thing that, I think it's important. Maybe we've been talking about this notion of intersectionality, that maybe to think about the individual and the collective. We've been, I think, forced to think about them as oppositional, but you can't think one without the other. Or the phrase "the personal is political," and so I think so often what we feel might be an innate, unique feeling that, like, I have, is really a function, or is really produced by the collective political experience. I mean, for example, one idea is just the isolation, let's say, that social media has produced, that has prevented us from feeling that sense of community. So I think that it's just really important to sort of challenge these words like species or false binaries like humans and non-humans, and really begin to think in this intersectional way, not only between different kinds of people of different ages, genders, races, disabilities, but also our relationship between, technology and animals. Or for example, Donna Haraway, the great critic of science, right, talks about each of us are prosthetic human beings, right? That we're not purely human, but we are contaminated in a certain way by technologies, both within our bodies, within our drugs, and what we use every day. So I just think it's important to maybe find a different vocabulary to talk in a more holistic way.
Yeah, it's about not making things too simple in a way. I mean, it's absolutely to echo that. And to come back to Kim's point, we don't know how individuals are going to find things. But there are cultures in which we exist, which picks up on Joel's point, and that simultaneously both are true. And every time we appeal to a kind of superhero culture, which is, there's a black and a white, and there's somebody who can fix things. Every time anything gets that simple, we've kind of lost the nuance. We've lost what makes it interesting to some extent. We've also made it quite dangerous, I think, because if that's the way that people want it, then we're pandering to fear rather than complexity, and we aren't going to answer some of the questions we're asking. So,
there's one more. There's a question, Lucy, please.
Oh, is it? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I hope I'm not pandering to fear now. But I do want to come back to the slide of Uta's slide about democracy and the documenta, and I guess a sense that the conversations that you've been having now are kind of conversations that one can have in a best possible context, right? Where you've got, here in Finland, we've got all the goodwill, and the support for these kinds of processes. And then I suppose my question is particularly to Uta and to Joël. Uta, I know that you have chosen to work in contexts where there isn't necessarily always the democratic impetus and isn't necessarily always the support for intersectional stroke interspecies processes, and yet you have found strategies to negotiate. So my question is about what strategies do we need when these kinds of platforms are under threat, or do we engage? There are members of my students who would be like, no, we don't engage. We just don't engage with anywhere that's not democratic, right? Let's cancel Germany. Let's not. But Uta, you've chosen to engage, and then Joël, kind of in the same theme. I think all of us are aware of the kinds of pressures that American institutions are under, and the ways in which progressive thought, be it intersectional or interspecies, is also under pressure. Are there new kinds of strategies needed also in an American context? Given, I just feel that it's been kind of like, there's this sort of cozy, everything's great and we can do all this stuff, but then there's this looming threats, which is not to get into, fear, but how do we deal with these looming threats, actual threats?
Do you want to start?
I mean, I think it counts for almost everybody. I mean, if you only engage, this is why I'm hardly on social media, because I just don't want to communicate with friends. I like it in the past when you go in a bar and you talk to somebody and you realize you have opposite opinions. And I think then it's getting interesting, because you have to question your own opinion. Why am I so sure if what I think is right? And why do I think what the others do is opposing who am I to judge? And I just think what you also said, Rafaela, to communicate, to stay open and to understand histories and systems. And again, democracy doesn't mean what a majority wants. It means to hear every voice. And I think to hear every voice means also to hear a voice that we don't like. And I think it allows us to grow. It allows us to be tolerant, but it also allows us to be distinct where we don't tolerate it. So I always think if we have the opportunity to engage in a context that is challenging ourselves, we grow. So I always benefit from being there. So I always encourage my students, or also others, don't just follow a pattern, see with your own eyes and then decide. Engage in a situation with your own experience and then decide, and not just follow what everybody says at this moment. And then, you say we have a gut, we also have a gut feeling, and I think we also have to trust that. And that might be different for each of us. And I just think we have to allow this insecurity, the anxiety we might have going into a new situation, and maybe then contribute and engage and exchange.
Well, your question, I don't know if I'm answering it, if it's possible to do that, but prompted me to think about what we call the ivory tower. And one of the sort of problems of the ivory tower, that it tends to be these meta-conversations that happen hermetically amongst like-minded people, and that we tend not to be really sort of engaged with if there's such a real world out there. And, on the one hand, I would say that one of the things that I think that's great about sort of the design disciplines, or in my case, architecture, is trying to overcome this divide between the isolation of academia or theory and practice and being out in the real world. And I think, for example, like when we're working on a project right now, a school for the deaf, or we're designing an exhibition for disability history, and when we're sort of sitting in the room and, asking people who've never been asked, like, what do you need? That makes me feel like I'm maybe making a difference. But I think maybe more directly to answer your question, if before people in the academy have been accused of, let's say, preaching to the converted, at least again in America, but I think not only in America. The academy is again an endangered species, right? And we are being sort of directly attacked and challenged. And I know my own colleagues, again, in public health have overnight lost all their funding and their ability to do their work. And it's not only, so I think it's come back, and I think it's directly impacting the supposedly immune world, for the privileged world that we occupy, or at least some of us occupy.
Does any other want to contribute to? I had a feeling that there was one more question. Was there? Yes, Helena.
Yeah, hey, I just wanted to go back to the first question, that was it you, Annukka, that asked about the different species within us. And I was kind of waiting to hear responses regarding like the killer, the murderer in us, and the savior, or the one who wants to have power, who has fear, and the collective, and supporting the collective. So what's your kind of thoughts around this, like how to navigate in the world today?
I would say that those are more characteristics than species. Is that, you can't put... people are a mixture of all kinds of different things, and they can be, good mothers and a murderer at the same time, and they can be things like that. But I mean, if you take species in the scientific sense, depending on, where you come from and all that, I think that, of course, that's why you need this creativity to cope with the different characteristics that come forward as a result of interaction and circumstance, because that's what you described if we're talking about murderers and people like that. And it's unfortunate that's how a society has to also interact in order to continue functioning on a sort of in a working way. I mean, that's just one.
To draw back on that example that I gave earlier, people dropping their cynicism for a while and actually talking to each other in a different mode was really interesting. I mean, I find myself doing that sometimes too, being called to be something in a context that maybe brings out a different quality in me that I wouldn't have known existed. One of the things I think design enables us to do is try out relations that we might not otherwise experience, and find out how we might be different, more communicative. Maybe for some of us we might discover our better selves or something. Those kinds of things, and it's so contextual because we've seen historically. I mean, there was very interesting sociological type tests in mid-century about what people will do in certain contexts and what they won't do, and some of it is interestingly being pulled apart and re-examined. For that sort of thing, I don't know whether everyone's familiar with the work of Rebecca Solnit, but she's a great American journalist and writer who looks at the motivation of hope very effectively. And I think in a small way, I'm looking at what happens if we do give people a sense of what's possible and what we might aspire to. I've been calling it effective prefiguration, which is one of those academic words that is not necessarily helpful outside this room, but it's a way of thinking about how we might feel towards something we want, this connection that Rafaela's talked about, those sorts of things where, yes, because we do coexist, and some things bring out very different parts of ourselves, and some things lead our societies into very different places. So I think for me the challenge then is, how do we find for ourselves and our neighbours and the people we can influence the coexistence that maybe moves us best towards fulfillment, meaning, reconciliation with our fears and anxieties, which will be, with us, but need managing in productive ways. I think, if that's what you're asking about, all these beings coexisting, then a sense that we actually are keepers of that and we're keepers of each other's as well, I think is quite important, and design's contribution there could be bigger than it is.
Thank you, and I think this concludes our panel very nicely, and thank you everyone for joining. Thank you also the audience for joining. We have a little mingling possibility here, I think behind that wall, I'm guessing. Yes, thank you so much. What a pleasure. Thank you so much.